Yeah, so going backwards again, the Annapolis Convention, George Washington, Hamilton, they want a revision to the Articles. But very quickly, like I said, Madison says you can't what? Have you ever, I used to have a very terrible sort of metaphor for this. If you went out in the yard and picked up a pile of dog poo and poured powdered sugar on it, would you then want to eat it? No. It's already something that's not edible, right? So you can't really put powdered sugar on the Articles and make them, delightful. Like there's nothing really that can be done to them because the construction of it isn't tweakable enough, right? That's whose conclusion was. Madison and Washington. Now there are debates about the purpose of this convention. Big debates. In fact, there's one school of theory, one historian school called the Beard School, named after Charles Beard. Okay? His writings argue that this government was created to protect the property class of America from the masses. To protect America, what? From democracy. To make America safe from democracy. Do you understand? Keep in mind, democracy is a very bad word to the founders. It means who making decisions? Everybody. Ordinary, uneducated, unwashed masses who are easily manipulated and swayed, right? So they don't really want ordinary people participating. I'm going to show you that when you look at the Constitution. This sometimes many historians consider oversold. In other words, George Washington isn't doing this solely out of selfish property interests. Although, is it probably a factor? Yes. Yeah, particularly when it comes to protecting private property from the attacks of the mob. Another school of thought is in the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to do what? Right. So we can just leave it at that. The idea is that the Articles of Confederation were not really based in Enlightenment principles. Particularly the writings, this is who Madison most admired as far as influentially, the Baron de Montesquieu. So Montesquieu in 1740s had written a book called The Spirit of Laws. And in it, what did he identify as the ideal form of government in terms of nature? I don't know, Montesquieu. Very good. Who was that? Who was that? Who said three branches? Landon, way to go, man. Three-branch government that does what to each other? Checks and balances. Was a unicameral, non-executive or judicial branch that? No, like that was not even, I mean, the Articles government did not look anything like what Montesquieu proposed. And Madison believes that Montesquieu is right. He believes that a three-branch government with separation of powers is a much better way to check the power of the government than to make a weak government. All right. Another one, and this is also in the phrasing, it is clear that we are not a nation under the Articles of Confederation. We're not one nation under God. We're 13 separate states living together in a league of friendship. You understand this? So think about this, for example. Before the Civil War, the language to describe America would be this. This is what you would hear. These United States of America are. What was that description? Singular or plural? It's a plural description, right? Like when we look up here and say United States, we don't consider that a plural. We think of that as one what? One nation. Well, prior to this, there are 13 sovereign states in a league of friendship. See the difference? These United States are collectively fighting the British. So that doesn't really work. That's like a weak Holy Roman Empire. All right? Or Dutch Confederation. That is not a powerful country. Now, maybe you don't want a powerful country, but Washington says we do. We need a much more powerful country because who's messing with us? We learned this yesterday, y'all. Who's picking on us and we can't do anything about it?
The pirates from the
I didn't mention his title, but the Day of Algiers, right? The Day of Algiers, a North African pirate. Day of Algiers. France, are they picking on us? the Brits and the Spanish. So we have no national presence to deal with that, right? Was Virginia going to go fight these three countries? Okay, so we were a foreign weakling. And look at this. Even Jefferson, who was a pacifist, I'll put this quote in here because it's a quote from Jefferson to Madison. Jefferson didn't like war. Look what he says. There will never be any money in the Treasury till the government, the Confederacy, shows its teeth. Meaning, what must we be able to do? Fight back. We can't just be like the weakling of the world, right? And that's also Washington's point of view. Okay, so they're meeting in Philadelphia. And who are the people that are there? Oh, by the way, I want to give you this quote because it's really useful because it helps you understand Hamilton a lot. I love that the musical is so popular. I'm thrilled by that. But the book is also really interesting. Hamilton, who comes from, who knows Hamilton's origin story? From the Caribbean, he's from Barbados, right? He's an illegitimate son of a Scottish tradesman, okay? So he starts out very low. He moves ultimately to New York, where his brilliance gets him successful in banking, in commerce. So he becomes a very, very successful banker. He was also a hero of the Revolution. But what's interesting of Hamilton to me is that he has a very, very low opinion of other people. The voice of the people have been said to be the voice of God, but that's not true. The people are turbulent. It means y'all are stormy. You change with the wind. 4 years ago, we saw Barack Obama be succeeded by none other than Donald Trump, right? 8 years before that, we saw George W. Bush replaced by Barack Obama. We change our minds, right? We're turbulent. We seldom judge or determine correctly. Hamilton's like, people are stupid, all right? In a democratic assembly who revolve in the mass of the people, be supposed steady to pursue the public good. Now, I know that sounds snobby, elitist, all right? But is he wrong? That's the question you have to ask. Because if he's right, then this is what they created. Jefferson thinks he's wrong. Locke would say he's not right. But this is a debate, too, about can the sort of ordinary people of the world govern themselves? And he said, no, nothing but a permanent body. What's he talking about there? Can check the imprudence of democracy. What's a permanent body in America? Congress not permanent, although they're a governmental body. You're on the right track. Yes. Hamilton is the creator of the idea of the Supreme Court. How long are you appointed to the Supreme Court? Life. So all this talk about Republicans appointing like pro-life, the most liberal justice in American history was appointed by a Republican. He was a Republican governor of California, Earl Warren. But once he was on the bench, then he interpreted the Constitution in a way that he thought appropriate. So in other words, and could anybody do anything about it? And that's the guy who helped end segregation. The imprudence of what? Remember, democracy creates Jim Crow. You voted in favor of Jim Crow laws, right? So Hamilton's saying we basically, not him, but the ordinary people are not who you want to depend on, for governmental decisions. That's what he said. So that goes along with this idea that the sort of elites created a government in which ordinary people would not have very much say in it at all. Okay? And they did. Now, it would be useful to know who the delegates were, not by name, but, well, some of them by name. Educated, overwhelmingly. They're all either lawyers or, except for Washington, or really well-educated people in some form or fashion. They're rich, really rich. They're fairly young for their age. They're like 40 years old, which, again, I know y'all think that's ancient, but for people drafting the government of America, that's not a very old, wise, experienced group, is it? But enough. They're all white, as you might expect, and they're all guys, as you might expect. So this is middle-aged, white, rich dudes, okay? Washington wants people to be able to speak their mind. He knows that if what they say ends up in the streets, then they'll pay a price for it politically. This is why I don't particularly like when what people talk about behind the scenes becomes public, because they're just talking. I mean, input and thoughts. You know, like this is how people communicate. But if everything you say can and will be used against you later, then are people going to necessarily speak their minds? No, you know, and I hate that about it. You know, one person says the internet's not written in pencil, y'all, it's written in ink. You know, if you put it out there, it's done. So you keep that in mind. But Jefferson thought this was terrible. He said, I am sorry they began the deliberations by an abominable precedent, of tying up the tongues of their members. You know, like not being allowed to be out in public. Nothing could justify this, but the innocent of their intentions and ignorance of the value of public. So in other words, he say, I'm not going to disparage Washington. I'm just going to assume you made a mistake. Okay. I have no doubt that all the measures will be good and wise. It is an assembly of whom? What do they call them? Demigods. So the people there are some of the most noted leaders throughout the entire American, country at that time. Here they are again. I would like you to know that over half were veterans. So guys who have had that, that has guided their understanding. But they've also fought for their country. So they're not just people here talking about it. They've literally fought for it, right? Young, lawyers, rich. And then notice who's not there, because that's very important too. Some of the most notable revolutionary heroes are not there. And so there is, somebody points out, Jefferson, Henry, not John Adams, Sam Adams, and Hancock are all states' right small government people. Patrick Henry was chosen to be a representative, and he didn't go. He said, I smell a rat. They're up to something no good. By the way, if you have a chance to go be involved in something that you don't agree with, that's probably a good idea, because you can tell them I don't agree with it. You're not going to have any influence over it. What? You don't go. You can rage against the machine, or you can try to help control the machine. That's their knowledge. Now, who's there? By far the most important for our understanding of credibility is Washington. But Washington being there means the whole thing is what? Is a legitimate thing. Like nobody's just going to be like, oh, well, Washington, we're not going to. Very legitimate. Now, the man who is the secretary of the convention, he doesn't talk himself. He just keeps minutes. It's James Madison. Madison didn't like to talk. He didn't like to debate and argue and stuff like that. But he keeps the record of the Constitutional Convention. He's the one guy who gets to keep all the minutes. So guess who we know everything from about the Constitution? Madison. He's the guy who kept the record of it. All right. And he's also the guy who shapes the outcome of it. He's very influential. His opponents in Congress later are going to call him the big knife because he can cut so many deals. Right? Like he's a very gifted politician, but he works where? Behind the scenes. Have y'all ever noticed people kind of got what they wanted behind the scenes? They weren't the big boys. Washington is a strong silent type, presiding. Madison is going to make some key arguments you need to know. I'll tell you in a minute. And then, of course, Benjamin Franklin is there. So Franklin is always my character who bridges from the colonial. Keep in mind, he's a colonial representative of colonial Pennsylvania, like the colony, all the way up to the Constitutional Convention. So he's like at everything important in early American history. But he's 80 years old. He can't walk. He can barely hear. And famously, while he's there, he gives his walking cane, his stick, and he bequeaths it to George Washington. So it's kind of like he's saying, "You are the father of the country. I'm the grandfather of the country." But it's like the passing of the torch. Like, George Washington, you're the guy. All right. And so when they're writing the part about what a president should be, guess who they're looking at while they're writing it? No, who are they saying is the obvious guy to be a When they wrote Article 2 of the Constitution, they literally intended for the guy sitting on that hill, on that podium, to be the guy that was elected. Like there was no doubt that was going to be the first president, except for maybe George Washington. He might not. So here's Madison, and I'm going to talk about the Federalist Papers some more. But in the argument made at the convention, there's a major argument against what government we want to create. So what you guys need to know that the Constitution creates is a republic. Everybody got that? A representative government. Now, we call it a democratic republic by the way we select our representatives. The theory was at the time that a republic could not exist over a large territory. In other words, the bigger the country, republicanism kind of would break down. And was America a very large country? Yeah, I mean, keep in mind, we've got all the way to Mississippi. Yes. Virginia, the 5th district of Virginia that we live in is the size of New Jersey. Our county is the size of Rhode Island. So from Atlantic to the Mississippi is like Europe. You understand? It's like a huge area, a huge landmass. And so the argument went that a republic couldn't govern that territory. And Madison turned it on its head. He said, that's a better way to govern a large territory is through a centralized location. All right. But the second one, which is even more credible and incredible at the time, was that they thought a big, distant, centralized government could not protect your liberty. Madison said it is a better way to protect your liberty. Who is more likely to be a tyrant to you is not a distant, centralized government, but your neighbor. And he's right. Who created civil rights? Washington. Mississippi was denying civil rights. Alabama, in other words, who was taking away liberties? States, right? But who guaranteed those liberties? The federal government. So that's exactly what Madison said. And the Republican idea is that, because what is the government, the central government, supposed to focus on? The Constitution, the principles of government, right? Your neighbors are going to be what kind of people? Salem witchcraft tribe. Jealous, right? They'll vote away your property just as easily as anybody else's. So having an enshrined constitution with a central republic, he argues, will better defend your rights. It will not be like tyrannical Britain or France or Russia. Got that, everybody? Okay, and so here's one of the famous pictures. Okay, the other major objective they want to achieve is what's called a balanced polity or a balanced government. Was the Articles balanced? Were the Articles balanced? No, it was all the power in one body, right? One legislative branch. Unicameral, right? Yeah, unicameral. Okay. So the Constitution is going to be promoted and endorsed. One state or two states in reality are not going to join, and we're going to come back to this in a minute. In fact, I'm going to move this down to the ratification debate. That should probably be later. Oh, wow. Oh, I had it later. My bad. All right, so let's take a look at what they created. Looks like we may be Monday after all in the quiz, so that's okay. Well, let's get into the details here. This very first concept is something proposed initially by James Madison. But Madison is not going to talk. Keep that in mind. So what Madison does is he gets his friend, Edmund Randolph, right, who will be the first Attorney General of the United States. He gets Edmund Randolph to create a plan that shocks everyone. He wants a new government in which the legislature will have how many houses? 2, and that both houses will be represented by population. So what's that called? Obviously, large states plan, right? Because guess what Virginia is? A large state. A very populated state, right? And Madison knows this, right? He's kind of hedging his bets here. He wants a 2-house government, right? But population for both. Keep that in mind. Well, that's why it's sometimes called the Virginia Plan, because Madison and Randolph are from Virginia. We're going to call it the large state plan because it's easy, but for the Virginia Plan. Well, the small states are like, I don't like that at all. Keep in mind, under Madison's proposal, the Congress, which is dominated by the large states, would pick the judicial branch and the executive. So would that mean the large states would basically control the entire government? And so these small states or small populated states are like, no way, that's terrible. You're cheating. The New Jersey plan or small state plan, William Patterson. And he says, all right, we'll go with your 2 houses, but how should each house work? Equal representation for each state. Right. In other words, you won't get an advantage over us. Everybody will have the exact same numbers. We will have separate executive and judicial. And I do want you to pick up on letter C here. Congress is going to have a part of it, which is called the Supremacy Clause. Now, this is in the small states plan. Look at what this, you'll learn a lot of this in AP government. Take it, government in general. And this is where it goes back to that topic of treaties I was asking y'all about. This Constitution and the laws of the United States and all treaties under the authority of the U.S. shall be the supreme law of the land. Which means a state cannot do what? regarding a supreme law of the land. Override it, go against it, break it. This is called the supremacy clause. It's proposed in what thing? And it actually becomes part of the Constitution. It's in Article 6. Okay? Same thing, it's the supremacy clause. All right? But the problem is that neither plan pleases both groups, right? Big states are like, we don't like this, the small states don't like that. So then enter the Connecticut representative, Roger Sherman. And he says, oh, wait a minute, we can do a little bit of both. And this is sometimes called the Connecticut Compromise. The Sherman's from Connecticut. But we are going to call it the what? Great Compromise. Keep in mind, the Constitution is built on compromises, right? Because are you trying to satisfy 13 different states? You can't satisfy every, it's impossible to please all the people all the time, right? So you're trying to find things that will keep both sides happy. So this is how it works. You can see it here. Here's the Virginia plan. Here's the New Jersey plan. Okay? Power from the states, power from the people. They got more people, thus they didn't like it. All right? So, this is what we'll do. We'll have the House of Representatives, they call it the lower house, all right, based on population. So, take on the wall here, I've got my electoral map. The largest state population in America is California by a mile. They have 55 electoral votes because they have, I forget how many millions of people. 1 out of every 7 Americans is in California. Lots and lots of people have it. Yeah, I know. That's a lot. Well, I'm just telling you, if you think Virginia is big or important, you should try California or Texas. All right? So, population. We in Virginia today have 11 congressmen. You ever hear that? 11 congressmen. The upper house, 2 from each state.
Senate.
That's right, the U.S. Senate. So, small state plan is what? Senate. Large state plan is the House of Representatives. Got it? But here's the compromise for the House of Representatives. A revenue bill is a tax bill. All tax bills must start where? In the House of Representatives, the people's branch. That's how important taxes is. The Senate can't start taxing. They have to wait till the bill arrives on their door from the House. Because one of the things that they set was House of Representatives would be elected every 2 years. So if you raise taxes, what are you going to have to do? Go home and run on that, right? Go home and tell your voters why you raise taxes. Does that make sense? We have always been a country that didn't like taxes, all right, from the very beginning. Other elements. Remember this supremacy clause from the small states plan. It ends up there, right? It ends up there. What about then the states and this executive branch? Another compromise is the creation of this bizarre thing called what? The Electoral College. The reason we have an Electoral College is so that Rhode Island and Wyoming matter. Otherwise, 6 states will always pick the presidency. So small states wanted to have some influence on the executive branch, right? How many electors does a state have? Like numerically, not the number, but the sort of the formula.
It's House of Representatives plus the Senate.
Right. Very good. So it's the combination of your House membership and your senators. Every state has 2 senators, right? So if you look up there at Montana, you'll see they have 3 electors, or North Dakota. That means they have 2 senators and 1 congressman. They have a congressman for the whole state, all right? Because they don't have very many what? But they do have 3 electoral votes, and you need those votes. Many candidates do. 53 congressmen and 2 senators. Yeah. That is a lot when we have 11. Right? So 5 times as many people, in essence, in California there are in Virginia. And Virginia's not a small state. A good chunk of the states are single digit electors. So no, I'm not kidding. 5 or 6 states: Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, Michigan, Texas, California. You've got the presidency. Illinois, New York. A handful of them. So the point is that this is to try. The Electoral College was created, well, for another reason. Who will select the president? No. Very, very, very important that you recognize this. The Electoral College, all you got to do was vote for electors. And those electors didn't tell you who they were going to vote for. Because there were no political parties. Everybody understand? So when, like Abraham Lincoln ran for an elector position. He wanted to be elected. Today we have bound electors, which means they have to vote the way the state votes. But for much of American history, I mean, most of American history, you voted for an elector. And an elector, if the elector won from your party, they would vote for that candidate. That make sense? I don't know if there are any, and maybe an age requirement or something, but you know, usually the electors in Virginia are mucky mucks in the party. So they're like, you know, yeah, like you'd be a Republican Party of Virginia's chairman, their kid. I've seen like teenagers be electors or 20-somethings, like college students last time. So the Electoral College was designed so that states determine who the president is. And that's why in the last election, you know, Hillary Clinton secured 2 million more popular votes, 2 million, than Donald Trump, but she lost the election.
Because the Electoral College had.
She lost the Rust Belt. Yep, she lost the Rust Belt electors. That's right. And when she lost that, like I said, you can win California and you come close to winning the election just there, you know, because they already have a head start on population.
Hey, Touart.
Yeah.
Why are the presidential candidates on the ballot instead of like electors?
Well, the answer to that is not correct. So let me show you a ballot. All right, at least in our state.
I haven't voted, so
that's okay. Let me show you, buddy. That's a very good question. I'm going to try to zoom this in. Yeah. This is what a ballot, this is Mecklenburg County, but this is what it looks like when you vote, even now. People don't even notice it when they vote, but it's there. What do you see under president and vice president? Democratic Party, electors for Joseph Biden. Republican Party, electors for. You see that? And
yeah, I see that.
That's how it's always been. You know, we don't think of it that way, but we've always voted for electors. Even, you know, of course, back in the day, you voted for electors who were important people who would then make a decision amongst other important people. So like when we think about the election of George Washington, that was not based on a popular election. George Washington was elected by who?
The important people.
Yeah, the electors. Yeah, and the electors usually were selected by these state legislatures unless they had at large. So getting back to it, by the way, who appoints the judicial branch? As in today, this week? The president. So who selected the president? Electoral College. Who selected the judiciary was a person who was not in the hands of the people. Who elected senators? How about that one? The state legislatures. Everybody hear that? So the General Assembly of Richmond would elect your state senators out of 2 important Virginians. It will not be until the 17th Amendment, which is in the 19-teens, do we have what's called direct election of senators. So if you do the math, there's 3 branches of government, right? This creates a 3-branch government. Okay? This is just a second. A 3-branch government. One branch, the presidency, is not elected by the people, then. Second branch, the judiciary, is definitely not selected by the people. Third branch, only half of it was selected by the people. You understand? So if you're reading into this, does it sound like this is democratic very much?
Not really.
No, it's much more sort of oligarchy, meaning who's in charge? The elites. The elites are choosing from the elites who will be the early leader. Now, slowly, throughout American history, democracy grows. Everybody understand that? As a key component of our history class is recognizing that how far we've come, right? There have been 6 amendments to the Constitution expanding suffrage. There's an amendment that changed the nature of elections of senators. And there is a real push to change the Electoral College to this day. You understand? To make it more democratic, in a sense. So the point of it is that our founders were very suspicious of the common man participating. Okay, keep in mind, no public schooling, and you know, the property requirements for local elections were pretty much the same ones for state and national elections. Make sense? Okay, so I now want to take up the other issue that is by far to me one of the most troublesome. You know, representation is, well, you know, a debate. But one of the real problems that the North had was the South had, well, the North had more people, right? A lot more people, because people didn't migrate to the South. Why? Why wouldn't you migrate to the South as much? Maybe the climate, although I will tell you, I love the climate of the South. Job opportunities. You are having to compete with massive planters and slave labor. So it's just not a place where people were attracted to. You could move to Western Pennsylvania. You could move to Ohio. There was no slavery. There were no plantations. You understand? So you could be a 160-acre yeoman farmer. Therefore, the South felt like, well, we're going to be in trouble representatively, right? So they demanded that who count in terms of their population for representation? Slaves. Would slaves be citizens? No. Would slaves be able to vote? No. They would have no civil rights. And the Northerners were like, well, that's crazy. They're not people under your definition, right? And the South was like, well, we're not supporting this if you don't. So what did they come up with? They counted 60% of a person. Do you understand? 3/5.
So it took 5 slaves to make 3 votes.
Well, to make 3 people in terms of population, 3 like white people, sadly. You know, in other words, by every 5 black slaves or freemen, I'll point that out too, they would count as 3 people towards the census. Okay. So by the way, that means we know a lot about Southern slave ownership, because do you think they made sure their slaves were documented for the census so that there would be more representation? Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of evidential record on slavery in America. I mean, it's absolutely just not from the slaves, sadly, you know, but from their owners, so to speak.
So that documentation probably worked for the slaves themselves.
Oh, no. I do want to make sure this is understood, particularly. An average 30-year-old field hand, male, in today's money would be the equivalent of an F-150 pickup truck. So deeply valuable. Now, politically, also valuable, right? But while violence occurred against slaves, you know, that really did happen a lot. It was not to the point of crippling people or damaging them to the point. In other words, they would use terror to make slaves work. But this was an enormous capital outlay. This is where all their money was, in land and slaves. So yeah, it was a big deal for them politically. And when the North basically got the impression the South's not going to go along with this Constitution if we don't have our interests, quote unquote, represented. The second thing had to do with the slave people coming into America. You know, importation of slaves. Okay? And I want to take you to the Constitution. Well, got that in their place too. So, first of all, the Constitution does not call slaves slaves. I mean, it's in there, but it's not in there. There's no mention. Now, there is one mention of the word slavery. Does anybody know where it is? Very good. The 13th Amendment, when slavery is abolished in America. But initially, there are 3 mentions of all other persons in the Constitution, the original document. Representatives shall be apportioned. So this is population, apportionment. Respective numbers, which will be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including indentured servants, excluding Indians, and who? 3/5 of all other persons. Well, who are those other persons? There you go. Yeah. Well, this question arises, did they count blacks here or here? And I don't have a definitive answer to that. I looked at it for you. I thought I remember reading Freeman counted here, all other persons, but they may have been determined as free persons. You know, I'll double check, because one of the hardest things for me to study is freedmen in the South. They were there. We know they existed, but they were hated by white people, because they're an example of freedom for other black people to see. So I don't know definitively on freedom there. Another one, and this is the slave trade clause. So in 1788, which is when this was taking place, you could still bring slaves from Africa to America. You understand? Like you could buy them from Spain, buy them from Portugal, buy them from Britain, or Rhode Island, or one of the other Newport would head over and get slaves. So many people in America wanted to abolish that. The international slave trade, they considered that to be kidnapping. The migration or importation of such persons, right, as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit, shall not be prohibited prior to. And they actually put an expiration date on the international slave trade. 1808, 20 years later. But a tax may be imposed on such importation, not more than $10. So we can tax you for bringing in slaves. In 1808, Congress, Thomas Jefferson's president, Congress outlaws the African slave trade. Okay? So they couldn't touch that in the Constitution for 20 years. Understood? So, but they do eventually ban this part. Now, the third part, many people aren't aware of. And we're normally not going to focus on it too much now. We're going to focus a lot of it on 1850. So there was a real concern by Southern slave owners about runaway slaves. You understand? People who would escape, as they would want to do. And so it says here, no person held to service or labor in one state, escaping into another, shall under any law be discharged from that labor, but shall be delivered up on the claim of the person who they are owed to. This is called the fugitive slave clause, meaning if you escaped under the Constitution, what was supposed to happen if you were caught? Return to your owner, right? Your person. And so this part is also very ugly. But in 1850, they're going to add a law. Congress is going to make a law that makes it even worse. It's going to make it a crime if you don't participate in capture. Like if you knowingly know a runaway slave, so you probably heard of something called the Underground Railroad, right? So you're going to have a federal law that made the Underground Railroad illegal. So these are the compromises. Now, critics will say this should never have happened, right? They should never have done these, okay? And I totally understand that argument. But I will say this. The evidence shows that the southern states would have gone it alone then. They would have met and formed their own group had slavery been abolished in 1787. Because that's the language they used. They're like, we're not doing that, And so I know that it's hard to read that our founding government document had that. But I think the beauty is all of this stuff's been eliminated. So while we may have started out really badly, at least history has changed. Okay? Now there's a third compromise between North and South, and it's over commerce. See, what did Southerners already know the North was going to be good at? Because they were becoming good at it in 1788.
Right.
Manufacturing. Yeah, factories. Trade already, but yeah, factories, right? Factories were emerging, and they wanted high tariffs to keep out foreign products. Okay? Cotton wanted what? No tariffs on exports. Hello? Okay, here I am. Oh, awesome sauce. All right. All right, I'll be there. All right, bye. All right. So, by and large, it's a fairly easy document to study. Article 1 of the Constitution creates the legislative branch. Within the legislative branch are very specific duties of Congress. There's also specific identity, like age and residency requirements. But the Constitution, in many ways, is a blueprint, right? And when the document was drafted, several people were furious and left. Take a look. Elbridge Gerry, Edmund Randolph, and George Mason. Mason, the author of the Virginia Declaration of Rights. Remember that guy? Did I talk about the Virginia Declaration of Rights?
I don't think so.
Thought I did.
Talk about the Virginia.
Mason?
Virginia section.
I did do that too. Make sure you remember Mason is another one of the key founders who had already written something called the Virginia Declaration of Rights before the Declaration of Independence. Okay? These three guys leave. They're like, they quit. And the reason they quit is what Thomas Jefferson writes. Now, guys, Jefferson is in Paris. He's America's first ambassador to France. Okay? John Adams is in London. He's our first ambassador to England. So neither of those two influential figures are at the Constitutional Convention. But what he said, Jefferson writing to Madison, I like the idea of a three-branch government. Guess who else had read Montesquieu, right? We like this. We've read these the book, okay? But I do not like the omission of what? A Bill of Rights. And this is going to be the thing that the people that are known as the anti-federalists do not like. Because they are used to, from England, from their own states, guarantees of liberty. And does this document have that? It doesn't. Now, Hamilton's going to say you don't need it. All right? The way the government's designed, it's not going to take away your liberty, and even tell your states have declarations of rights. Right? That doesn't work, though. Okay? So the absence of the Bill of Rights is the number one reason the Federalists don't, or the anti-Federalists don't like this document. Okay? They really want it. So do you know how Madison resolves that? He promises them that if you vote on this Constitution in favor of it, the first year Congress is in session, we will add a Bill of Rights. And guess what they do? In 1788, they add a Bill of Rights. Okay, the Bill of Rights. You know, so that's Madison's solution. Is like, all right, we'll fix it later. Okay, and then the second one he writes about, I really do.
Rotation of office.
No rotation in office. What's that mean?
Means people can be reelected over and over.
No term limits. Very good. Particularly in the case of who?
President.
The president. I don't like that presidents don't have term limits, he says. All right. But also, Congress doesn't have term limits, which I don't like personally. You know, so no term limits. And we do fix that. Okay. You have something called the 22nd Amendment, which created a 2-term maximum for president service. Okay. But that was after FDR had been elected 4 times.
I was going to say, wasn't he had the most terms of any president?
Oh, yeah. 4. Yeah. In fact, he blew it all. I mean, what happens is George Washington, interestingly enough, is going to choose to retire, okay, in 1797. And that means that he creates the precedent of presidents, right? Like, 2-year terms. 2 terms maximum. And no one will break that until FDR, who's the only one who.
And that was because of
World War II. World War II. Yeah. The 3rd term was in 1940. Yeah, so you're doing the math. We get bombed at 41. World War II had already started.
Yeah.
And so they're afraid of the terrible nature of it. So, but if you look down there, you're also going to see some insight into Jefferson himself. I am not a friend to a very energetic government. We will be virtuous as long as it's agriculture and there is vacant, empty land. Above all, I hope who will be attended to. The education of the common man. If you ever wonder philosophically why I do what I do, because I believe in a republic of educated, ordinary Americans. I believe in citizen soldiers. I don't believe in powerful nation states made up of stormtroopers. You understand? I believe in free people making decisions once informed. That's Jefferson, Jeffersonian. But he overall is like, I'm kind of mixed. This line about not being a friend of energetic government, the quote that is most associated with Thomas Jefferson's view on governance is that government which governs best governs least. All right. So in other words, what does he want in terms of a government? A virtually non-existent one, right? Jefferson's one step away from anarchy. He's like, I want a tiny little government. And he does it as leader. And it's interesting about Jefferson. All right. So because also the unanimous consent part seemed really, really impossible, they only required 2/3 approval to ratify the Constitution. They only had 9 of the states, as opposed to all of them, because they expected some would not go along with it. All right. They actually chose conventions, okay, because they figured the states would selfishly guard their power, which they did. And in many states, they tried to stop the Constitution. I know that's hard to imagine, like, oh no, this thing is a terrible document, but that's what they were like. So who are the Federalists and who are the Anti-Federalists? So the Federalists were your richer, well-educated people who were looking for a strong protection of property in central government. John Marshall, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, George Washington to a lesser degree. All right, so you're more traditional, wealthy, and also typically more urban. Okay, your Anti-Federalists represented the more rural, smaller agricultural areas of the country, like Patrick Henry and Thomas Jefferson and Sam Adams. Right, so the more common man. The Anti-Federalists were very much afraid of the taxation authority of Congress. Keep in mind, what did the Articles not have? Taxation. The power to tax. Yeah, this right off the top. If I pull out my Constitution here, Article 1, Section 8 is where the powers of Congress are. All right, the defined enumerated powers. Right, Article 1, Section 8. And if you go to Article 1, Section 8, right off the bat, here it says, number one, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes. So it's like priorities, right? That's definitely going to correct that problem. And then, you know what the second one was? To regulate commerce with foreign nations. So it's like the two biggest glaring weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation were the first two powers Congress has defined. Fair enough? Now, it looked like that it was not going to get passed. Here's the vote, right? The Constitution was signed by 11 states and Colonel Hamilton. That means New York was very much opposed to it, but Hamilton voted as New York himself. All right. Rhode Island did not vote in favor of it. In fact, if you look at the order, Rhode Island does not become a state of the United States until a year and a half into Washington's presidency. So technically, Rhode Island was like literally an island for a while. Okay. So here is the early on. This is why Delaware gets called the first state. Like, who cares about Delaware? But they're the first state to what? To agree. The big hurdle was Pennsylvania. Notice it wasn't unanimous, but 2/3 in favor. New Jersey goes, Georgia goes, Connecticut goes, no problem. Massachusetts has a dragged out convention. I mean, they were actually fighting over it at times. Okay? So it's very close. Western Mass versus Eastern Mass. A lot of that regional difference. But if you'll notice, when New Hampshire ratifies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that now makes America a country. But there are two glaring, obvious states that are not in America as of June 1788. Who are they? Virginia and New York. You cannot be America. You can live without North Carolina. Come on, North Carolina. You can definitely live without Rhode Island, but you can't live without Virginia or New York. So that means, and Hamilton is despairing of this. Hamilton is afraid it's not going to happen, as is Madison. But Madison runs into Hamilton at Washington Town. All right. And he agrees to go with him to New York to write a series of papers in the New York newspapers. Now, they are known in history as the Federalist Papers. Okay. They are not a singular book. They are a series of essays printed in New York newspapers. They have 3 authors, although John Jay leaves and only writes 4 of them. So John Jay is kind of like the non-important one. And the other 2 are written by Hamilton writes most of them. Madison writes the most important ones. All right. So Madison and Hamilton are going to collaborate on one of the greatest collections of political discourse on the U.S. Constitution. I have it back there to show you the entire. By the way, my students in AP Gov have to study and learn, basically, not from memory, but the content, 6 of the Federalist Papers. But let me grab them here. So this is the collected Federalist Papers. So it's not a small book. But it was published individually. So, again, looking at home, the Federalist Papers, right? So there are going to be several of them, but there were in opposition to them the Anti-Federalist Papers. By the way, the Federalist authors write under the name of, I have it here. Let me put it for you. They write collectively under the name The Public. Publius. So that's what they call themselves in the newspapers. It's a pseudonym, it's a code name, Publius. And then another famous hero of the Roman Republic Brutus, right? Remember him killing Caesar? All right, so you have another group write what are called collectively the anti-federalist papers. Notice it includes Richard Henry Lee and Patrick Henry, right? So if you look here, the debate mostly rages in our part of Virginia. We were the anti-federalist majority, okay, right here. Our representatives to the convention voted against it from Pennsylvania County, okay, because they're afraid they're going to give up their liberty to this distant centralized government. So, be aware that there are Federalist papers and that there are anti-Federalist papers, okay? But the ones that are going to win the argument, because take a look at the vote. Virginia, 89 to 79. New York, 30 to 27 in the General Assembly. It was crucial, wasn't it? Yep. This series of letters is the thing that puts, because they're in the public. Okay, so in the convention, ultimately they're passed. I think the promise of a Bill of Rights is the thing that put it over. All right, I'm pretty sure that's the case. Here are some of the things about the Federalists. You don't have to know these by memory, but I do want you to have seen them. Here you see Madison calling what a bad thing? Democracy, right? It is incompatible with security and property. They are short in lives as they have been violent in death. All right. Normally, democracy doesn't work because it turns into what kind of people being stupid? Yeah, the masses, right? Federalist 47. No truth is greater than the accumulation of all power within the hands of one. It is the definition of tyranny. He is quoting Montesquieu in Federalist 47. So this is the separation of powers, right? So you should know elements of the Constitution from the Federalist Papers. Not democratic. Know this, write this kind of stuff down. Not democratic, separation of powers. Because what will these three branches do? It will control itself through checks and balances. He says the very great difficulty, oh, Fed 51 is also the one where he says that men were angels. All right, but he says the great difficulty in framing a government, you must enable the government to control the people. Remember I said all government has coercion? That's the nature of government. But in the next place, it must control itself because government can become corrupt just like anything else. So the way it controls itself is checks and balances because the Congress will jealously defend its power against who? The executive. If the executive uses his power or the legislature, the judicial will call them out for being unconstitutional, right? So you have the three branches jealously fighting it out with each other, but not literally fighting it out. And that's a good thing. All right? Yeah, men were angels, we would have no need of government, right? So this is whenever my friends who are Christian anarchists or some sort of anarchic idea propose the notion of not having government, I'm like, well, Madison beat you to the punch. I'll let him be my argument. He's smarter. Okay? Anyway, Hamilton comes in and creates two other defenses. The defense for the judiciary, judges must be what? Independent. It's not political. How are you going to make sure they're independent? Put them there for life, right? Don't have to worry about ever running for office. Don't ever worry about being impeached unless you do something like criminal, all right? And then this is something we're going to get to again because I don't think you guys have learned it yet. It says here, Hamilton is writing something that will become what the Supreme Court does. It is urged that the authority to declare the acts of the other void. Today, we take for granted that the role of the Supreme Court is to determine what is constitutional, right? That was not the case in 1788. But Hamilton is implying that this court system will be the one that holds other acts void. And this will be a great controversy. I mean, a big-time controversy, okay? The courts are the intermediate body. So he is the big defender of the Supreme Court. Okay? And the presidency. It's also he that proposes the presidency role and the electoral college. So in the end, the Constitution is carried. It is a brilliant document in many ways because it's lasts so long. We've edited it in ways that I see very important too. A few times I think we screwed up. We fixed like prohibition. 18th Amendment said you can't manufacture, sell, or distribute alcohol. 21 said we got that wrong. All right, and I can always remember that old drinking age, new drinking age. All right, but the point is that we haven't tinkered with this much. France has had 5 constitutions in the same time span. So our Constitution is a miracle of compromise. And today, up in near James Madison's home at Montpelier, they have the Center for the Constitution. And every year, people from all over the world come to America to study how to draft constitutions. like the practical creation of a country's constitution. And they study it in Madison's home, more or less. I love working up there and being around it. So I hope that made it clear to you about the Constitution. We'll learn a lot more later, but that's a good start, I think.